Tell us in the comments which city you're listening from. Click the like button, and let's begin the story. Marcus Chen was 14 years old when he learned that family doesn't always mean protection. His parents died on a Tuesday afternoon in October, their sedan crushed beneath an 18-wheeler that jackknifed on Interstate 5 near Bakersfield. The highway patrol said they died instantly. Marcus was in 9th grade algebra class when the principal called him to the office. He didn't cry during the meeting with the social worker. He didn't cry at the funeral 3 days later, attended by 7 people he barely recognized. He didn't cry when those same people, distant cousins of his father, an uncle he'd met twice, an aunt who lived in Oregon, gathered in the living room of his childhood home and discussed his future as if he weren't sitting right there on the couch. "The boy can't stay here alone," the uncle said, a balding man in his 50s who smelled like cologne and impatience. "He's 14. The state will take him." "What about the property?" the aunt asked. "Robert and Lynn owned this land outright, didn't they?" The family lawyer, an elderly man named Mr. Castellanos, who had handled his parents' modest affairs, cleared his throat and opened a folder. "Yes, 60 acres in the Central Valley, about 40 minutes east of Fresno. It was purchased 12 years ago. The deed is clear. No mortgage. But," he paused, looking uncomfortable, "there are significant back taxes. The property has been unproductive for some time." "Unproductive?" one of the cousins asked. "It's a vineyard," Mr. Castellanos explained. "Or it was decades ago. The vines have been dead for at least 20 years. The soil is considered exhausted. Your brother and sister-in-law bought it with the intention of restoring it, but they never had the capital to begin the work. Frankly, the land is worth less than the tax debt." The room fell silent. The uncle spoke first. "So it's worthless." "Not worthless," the lawyer corrected carefully, "but it would require substantial investment to make it viable again. Investment that, given the condition of the soil and the age of the infrastructure, might never yield returns." The aunt shook her head. "We can't take that on. I have 3 kids in college. We're barely managing as it is." The cousins murmured agreement. No one wanted a dying vineyard in the middle of nowhere. No one wanted the tax burden. No one wanted the responsibility. "What happens to the property if no one claims it?" the uncle asked. Mr. Castellanos adjusted his glasses. "It would go to the boy. He's the sole heir. But given his age and circumstances, the state would likely manage it until he's 18. Or more realistically, it would be sold to cover debts and his care costs." They all looked at Marcus then. He sat very still, hands folded in his lap, staring at the floor. He could feel their eyes on him, measuring, calculating, dismissing. "The boy needs stability," the aunt said, her voice softening with manufactured sympathy. "Not a failed farm. Let the state handle it. He'll be better off." They signed papers that afternoon, legal documents renouncing any claim to the estate. Within an hour, they were gone, back to their own lives, their own families, their own comfortable certainties. Mr. Castellanos stayed behind. He sat across from Marcus in the empty living room and handed him a manila envelope. "This is yours," he said quietly. "The deed to the property. It's in your name now. The state will assign you a guardian, probably place you in a group home until you're 18. But legally, the land belongs to you." Marcus took the envelope but didn't open it. "Your father gave me something else," Mr. Castellanos continued. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a smaller envelope, yellowed with age. "He asked me to hold this and give it to you if anything ever happened to him and your mother." Marcus opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a hand-drawn map of the property, crude but detailed, showing the boundaries, the old house, the rows of dead vines. And at the bottom, in his father's careful handwriting, were 7 words. "The land always gives what you plant, but sometimes the greatest treasure is already buried." Marcus read it 3 times. "Do you know what it means?" he asked. Mr. Castellanos shook his head. "Your father was a dreamer, Marcus. He believed that land had memory, that it held value beyond what markets recognized. Maybe he meant it philosophically. Or maybe..." He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "Maybe what?" Maybe he found something out there that he never told anyone about. The social worker came the next morning. Her name was Mrs. Alvarez, and she had kind eyes but a tired voice. She explained that Marcus would be placed in a state youth facility in Fresno temporarily while they located a suitable foster family. "You'll be taken care of," she promised. "You'll have food, a bed, education. You'll be safe." Marcus nodded and said nothing. They let him pack one bag. He took clothes, a few books, a photograph of his parents, and the 2 envelopes Mr. Castellanos had given him. The youth facility was a converted elementary school on the east side of Fresno. It housed 43 minors between the ages of 12 and 17. Kids removed from abusive homes, runaways picked up by police, orphans like Marcus with nowhere else to go. His room was on the 2nd floor, shared with 3 other boys. Bunk beds with thin mattresses. A single window with bars. Fluorescent lights that buzzed constantly. The rules were simple. Wake at 6. Breakfast at 6:30. School from 8 to 3. Chores until 5. Dinner at 6. Free time until 8. Lights out at 9. No exceptions. Marcus followed the rules. He didn't cause trouble. He didn't make friends. He studied quietly, worked efficiently, and spoke only when necessary. The other kids called him Ghost. At night, lying in his bunk while his roommates snored or whispered or cried softly into their pillows, Marcus would unfold the map his father had left him and trace the property lines with his finger. 60 acres, a lifetime of his parents' savings, poured into dirt that everyone said was worthless. But his father's note kept echoing in his mind. The greatest treasure is already buried. What if it wasn't a metaphor? What if his father had actually found something? 3 months passed. Winter turned the valley cold and gray. Marcus turned 15 in January. No one remembered. No one celebrated. It was in February that everything changed. Marcus overheard 2 counselors talking in the hallway outside the administrative office. "Another batch going out next week," one of them said. "Agricultural work program. They need laborers for the spring planting." "How many kids?" 12. "All boys, 15 and older. State gets paid per head, and the farms get cheap labor. Win-win. Except for the kids. They're learning job skills. Better than sitting around here." Marcus felt his chest tighten. He'd heard about the agricultural work programs, unofficial contracts that sent miners to industrial farms where they worked 12-hour days for minimal wages that were paid directly to the state, not to them. He knew his name would be on that list. That night, he made his decision. He wasn't going to wait for the state to ship him off to pick vegetables for someone else's profit. He wasn't going to let his parents' land, his land, be sold off to pay for his institutionalization. He was going to do what his father would have done. He was going to go home. The next morning, Marcus went through his routine exactly as usual. Breakfast, classes, chores, dinner, free time. But at 7:45, when the other residents were in the common room watching television, Marcus slipped into the storage closet near the back exit where the maintenance staff kept cleaning supplies. He'd noticed weeks ago that the lock was broken, that the door led to an alley behind the building, that there were no cameras covering that particular exit. He waited until 8:15, when the night shift counselor made his first rounds of the upper floors. Then he walked out. No running, no panic. Just a 15-year-old boy in a gray hoodie and worn jeans, walking calmly through the streets of Fresno like he had somewhere to be. He did. He was going to the property. He was going to find out what his father had buried. And he was going to prove that the land everyone abandoned was worth fighting for. The walk to the Greyhound bus station took 40 minutes. Marcus bought a ticket to Coalinga with money he'd saved from a small monthly stipend the facility provided, $18 that was supposed to last him 2 weeks. The bus left at 9:30. He sat in the back, hood up, face turned toward the window, watching the city lights fade into darkness. By 11, he was standing on the side of Highway 198, 30 miles from his destination, with no money left and no plan except to keep walking. The night was cold. The road was empty. Above him, Stars spread across the sky in configurations he'd forgotten existed. Marcus walked east, following the highway, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Somewhere ahead, buried in the dark valley, was the land his parents had died believing in, and he was going to find out why. Marcus walked through the night, staying close to the edge of the highway where the gravel shoulder met the dry grass. Every time headlights appeared in the distance, he ducked into the brush and waited for the vehicle to pass. He couldn't risk being picked up by police or concerned drivers who would ask questions he couldn't answer. By 3 in the morning, his feet ached and his legs trembled with exhaustion. He found a concrete culvert beneath a rural overpass and crawled inside, wrapping his arms around himself for warmth. He slept in 20-minute intervals, startled awake by the rumble of passing trucks. When dawn broke gray and cold over the valley, Marcus stood and kept walking. The landscape around him was flat and endless. Fields of dormant crops, irrigation canals lined with dead weeds, farmhouses set far back from a road. Everything looked abandoned, even when it wasn't. By mid-morning, he recognized landmarks from the few times his parents had driven him to the property when he was younger. A bent stop sign, a boarded-up fruit stand, a water tower with faded letters that once spelled Coalinga. He turned off the highway onto a narrow county road that cut through empty fields. 2 miles later, he found it. The property had no gate, no fence, no sign marking it as anything special. Just a dirt driveway that disappeared into a tangle of dead grapevines and brittle brush. Marcus stood at the entrance, staring. This was it. 60 acres of gray, cracked earth. Row after row of twisted black vines that looked like skeletal hands reaching out of the ground. A small wooden house in the distance, its roof partially collapsed, its windows dark and broken. The land everyone said was worthless. The land his father had died believing in. Marcus walked slowly up the driveway, his footsteps crunching on dry soil. The air smelled like dust and decay. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just emptiness. When he reached the house, he stopped and stared up at it. The structure was small, maybe 900 square feet, built in a style that suggested it was at least 80 years old. The wooden siding was gray and splintered. The front porch sagged in the middle. The door hung crooked on broken hinges. Marcus pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior was worse than he'd imagined. Furniture covered in dust and rodent droppings. Walls stained with water damage. Floors warped and cracked. But it was shelter. And it was his. He set his backpack down in the least damaged corner of the main room and looked around. There was no electricity, no running water, no heat, but there was a stone fireplace that still looked structurally sound. There was a well outside that might still function, and there were supplies left behind, old cans of food in a pantry, blankets in a closet, tools in a shed behind the house. Marcus spent the rest of that first day exploring the property and making the house minimally livable. He cleared debris. He patched the worst holes in the roof with scraps of wood and plastic sheeting. He started a fire in the fireplace using dried vines as kindling. As night fell, he sat on the porch and stared out at the dead vineyard stretching into darkness. He understood now why his family had rejected this place. It looked like failure. It looked like a graveyard for ambition. But Marcus also understood something they didn't. He had nothing left to lose. And that made him free to try the impossible. The next morning, Marcus woke before sunrise and began working. He didn't have a grand plan. He didn't have resources or expertise. But he had his father's note. The land always gives what you plant. And he decided to take it literally. If he was going to survive here, he needed food. If he was going to claim this land as his own, he needed to prove he could make it produce something. He started small, using tools from the shed, a rusted shovel, a pickaxe, a rake. He cleared a section of earth near the house and began turning the soil. The ground was hard and dry, cracked like old leather. But beneath the surface, a few inches down, the soil was softer, darker. Maybe not completely dead after all. He worked for hours, sweating despite the cold, his hands blistering and bleeding. He cleared an area about 20 feet square, pulling up dead roots and rocks, breaking up compacted dirt. By the afternoon, he had a crude garden plot. He had no seeds, but he remembered seeing wild vegetables growing along the irrigation canal near the highway. He walked back and gathered handfuls of greens that looked edible: mustard plants, dandelion, wild onions. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Over the following days, Marcus established a routine: wake at dawn, work the garden, explore the property, forage for food, study the land. He found that the old well behind the house still produced water, rusty and metallic tasting, but drinkable after boiling. He discovered fruit trees scattered across the property, ancient, gnarled things that looked dead, but had a few stubborn branches still holding dried figs and wizened apples. He ate sparingly: dandelion greens, canned beans from the pantry, figs softened in boiling water. He lost weight. His clothes hung looser. His face grew lean and angular, but he felt stronger than he ever had. It was during the second week that he decided to expand his garden. The plot near the house was producing small sprouts of green, wild vegetables taking root. But Marcus wanted to try something more ambitious. He wanted to see if the vineyard soil could support real crops. He chose a section near the eastern edge of the property, where the land sloped slightly toward what had once been an irrigation ditch. The vines here were completely dead, nothing but dry stalks and tangled roots. He began clearing them. It was brutal work. The roots went deep, twisted around rocks and old wooden posts. Marcus hacked at them with the pickaxe, pulled them out with his bare hands, dragged them aside in piles that grew taller than he was. On the third day of clearing, his pickaxe struck something that wasn't root or rock. The impact sent a jolt up his arms and produced a hollow wooden sound. Marcus stopped. He knelt and brushed away loose dirt, revealing smooth, weathered wood buried about 2 feet below the surface. His heart began to race. He dug carefully around the edges, widening the hole, exposing more of the structure. It was a door, or more precisely, a trapdoor. Wooden planks reinforced with iron bands, set horizontally into the ground. Marcus sat back on his heels, staring. Why would there be a door buried in the middle of a vineyard? He grabbed the edge of the nearest plank and pulled. The wood was swollen with decades of moisture and packed earth. It didn't budge. He tried the pickaxe, wedging it into the seam between planks and prying upward. The wood groaned, cracked, splintered, and finally, with a sound like old bones breaking, the trapdoor gave way. Marcus yanked the broken planks aside, revealing darkness below. A tunnel, carved into the earth, descending at a steep angle into absolute blackness. Marcus stared into the opening, his breath coming fast. This was it. This was what his father had meant. The greatest treasure is already buried. He ran back to the house and grabbed the flashlight he'd found in the shed, old and heavy, its batteries weak but still functional. Then he returned to the tunnel and began his descent into the dark. The tunnel was narrow and low, forcing Marcus to crouch as he moved forward. The walls were hard-packed earth reinforced with wooden beams that looked ancient and unstable. The air smelled damp and mineral-rich, like the inside of a cave. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness in a weak yellow cone, revealing only a few feet ahead at a time. Marcus moved slowly, testing each step, listening for sounds of collapse. The tunnel descended for about 30 feet, then leveled out into a wider passage. Here, the construction was more deliberate, stone blocks instead of packed earth, a vaulted ceiling high enough to stand upright, iron brackets on the walls where torches had once been mounted. This wasn't a crude hole in the ground. This was architecture. Someone had built this intentionally, carefully, and a long time ago. Marcus followed the passage as it curved gently to the right. The temperature dropped. The silence became oppressive, broken only by the sound of his own breathing and footsteps. Then the passage opened into a chamber. Marcus stopped and swept the flashlight across the space. The chamber was roughly circular, maybe 20 feet in diameter, with a domed ceiling supported by thick wooden pillars. The floor was smooth stone, and along the walls, Marcus's breath caught. Barrels. Dozens of them. Wooden wine barrels, stacked 2 and 3 high, arranged in careful rows, their surfaces covered in decades of dust and cobwebs. Marcus approached the nearest barrel and wiped away the grime. Burned into the wood were markings, a date 1919, and a symbol he didn't recognize, some kind of family crest or winery seal. The year before Prohibition. Marcus understood immediately. This was a hidden cellar, a smuggler's cache, a place where wine had been concealed during the 13 years when alcohol was illegal in the United States. His father had known about this. That's why he'd bought the land. That's why he believed it had value no one else could see. But there was more. Marcus moved deeper into the chamber and found another passage branching off to the left. He followed it and discovered a second chamber, smaller than the first. This one contained racks of bottles, hundreds of them. Glass bottles filled with dark liquid, sealed with wax and cork, labels faded but still legible. Marcus picked one up carefully, angling the flashlight to read the label. Chateau Margaux, 1914. His hands began to shake. He didn't know much about wine, but he knew enough to understand that a bottle from a legendary French vineyard, produced before World War I and somehow transported to California, would be worth a fortune. And there were hundreds of them. He set the bottle down gently and explored the rest of the chamber. In the far corner, beneath the canvas tarp stiff with age, he found wooden crates stamped with shipping marks in French and German. He pried one open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were gold coins. Marcus lifted one out, holding it up to the flashlight. It was heavy, smooth, stamped with a date, 1898, and an image of a European monarch he didn't recognize. There were at least 50 coins in this crate alone, and there were 6 crates. Marcus sat down hard on the stone floor, his mind reeling. This wasn't just a wine cellar. This was a smuggler's treasury. Whoever had built these tunnels hadn't just been hiding alcohol. They'd been hiding wealth, assets transported from Europe, probably during the chaos of World War I and the Russian Revolution, moved across the Atlantic and buried in rural California, where no one would ever think to look. And then they disappeared, or died, or simply never came back. And the secret had stayed buried for over a century, until a 15-year-old orphan with nothing to lose started digging in dirt everyone else had written off as worthless. Marcus sat in the darkness for a long time, trying to process what he'd found. His mind raced with questions. Who had built this place? Why had they chosen this specific location? What had happened to them? But beneath the questions was a deeper realization. He wasn't going to starve. He wasn't going to be shipped off to a labor farm. He wasn't going to lose this land. He had just found enough wealth to change everything. But he also understood something critical. He couldn't just walk into town with a crate of gold coins and bottles of wine worth thousands of dollars each and expect no one to ask questions. He was 15 years old, legally a runaway, officially a ward of the state. If anyone found out what he'd discovered, it would be taken from him. The state would claim it, or thieves would steal it, or lawyers would tie it up in courts for years while he rotted in a group home. Marcus made a decision in that dark chamber, surrounded by forgotten treasure. He would be patient. He would be smart. He would protect this secret until he was old enough and strong enough to claim it legally. And in the meantime, he would do exactly what his father's note had said. He would plant. He would work the land. He would make it produce. He would establish himself as the legitimate owner through years of documented labor. And when the time was right, he would reveal what he'd found, not as a desperate kid with a wild story, but as a landowner with legal rights and undeniable proof. Marcus stood and took one last look around the chamber. Then he climbed back up through the tunnel, carefully replaced the broken trapdoor with fresh boards, and covered it with dirt and vines. No one could know, not yet. He returned to the house and added wood to the fire. Outside, the dead vineyard stretched into darkness. But beneath it, invisible to the world, lay a fortune. And above it, a 15-year-old boy sat by firelight, planning a future no one thought he deserved. Over the following months, Marcus transformed himself from a runaway into a farmer. He had no formal training, no equipment beyond hand tools, no guidance except for agriculture books he found in the abandoned house. Old manuals from the 1940s and 50s, their pages yellowed and brittle, but still readable. He learned by doing. He expanded his garden plots, rotating crops seasonally. He repaired sections of the old irrigation system, channeling water from the well through crude trenches he dug by hand. He composted organic waste, enriching the exhausted soil one small section at a time. The work was endless and brutal. His hands became calloused and scarred. His back ached constantly. His body grew lean and hard. All excess weight burned away by physical labor and minimal food. But he saw results. Green shoots pushing through dark earth. Tomatoes ripening on vines he'd planted. Squash growing fat and yellow in the sun. The land wasn't dead. It had just been waiting for someone to care. Marcus also began documenting everything. He found an old camera in the house, a film camera that still worked, and used it to photograph his progress. The cleared fields, the planted rows, the growing crops. He kept a detailed journal, recording dates, weather conditions, what he planted, and where. He saved receipts from the few purchases he made. Seeds bought with money earned from selling vegetables at a roadside stand 10 miles away. He was building a legal record, proof of continuous habitation, proof of agricultural improvement, proof that he was the active, working owner of this land. Adverse possession laws in California were complex, but Marcus had read enough to understand the basic principle. If you openly occupied and improved abandoned property for 5 continuous years, you could claim legal ownership even without a formal deed transfer. He already had the deed in his name, but he was a minor. The state could challenge his capacity to manage the property. So he needed to prove, beyond any doubt, that he was competent, responsible, and committed. 5 years. He could do that. He had nowhere else to go anyway. It was in his 8th month on the property that he had his first close call. A county assessor's vehicle appeared at the end of the driveway one afternoon in late summer. Marcus saw it from the garden and immediately went still, his heart hammering. A middle-aged woman in a county uniform stepped out, carrying a clipboard and a camera. "Hello," she called. "Anyone here?" Marcus hesitated, then walked toward her slowly, wiping dirt from his hands. "I'm here," he said. The woman looked surprised. "You're young. Do your parents own this property?" "It's mine," Marcus replied. "Inherited it." She consulted her clipboard. "This parcel has been flagged for back taxes. The county has it listed as potentially abandoned." "It's not abandoned," Marcus said. "I live here. I've been working the land for 8 months." The assessor looked skeptical. "You're what, 16? 15. Where are your parents?" "Dead." The word hung in the air. The woman's expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry, but you can't be living here alone at your age. Does the state know you're here?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "I'm legally entitled to this property. I have the deed, and I'm actively improving it. California law protects my right to occupy and cultivate my own land." The assessor studied him for a long moment. Then she looked past him at the rows of vegetables, the repaired irrigation ditches, the obvious signs of sustained labor. "You did all this yourself?" "Yes, ma'am." She walked past him slowly, examining the property with a practiced eye. Marcus followed, his pulse racing. If she reported him to child services, everything would collapse. They'd pull him out. They'd place him back in the system. They'd sell the land to cover debts. The assessor stopped near the garden and crouched, running her fingers through the soil. "This earth was considered dead," she said quietly. "I assessed this parcel 3 years ago. The previous owners, your parents, couldn't make anything grow." "I know," Marcus said. "How'd you do it?" "Patience, compost, rotating crops, water management." She stood and looked at him with something like respect. "Kid, I don't know your full story, and maybe I don't want to, but I can see you're not just squatting here. You're working." She made notes on her clipboard. "The back taxes are still a problem. You owe the county about $14,000 going back 6 years. Marcus's stomach sank. He didn't have $14,000. He had maybe $200 in cash from vegetable sales. "How long do I have?" he asked. "Technically, the county can seize property after 3 years of delinquent taxes. You're past that threshold." "But," she paused, "if you can show active improvement and demonstrate a payment plan, the county might grant an extension." "How do I do that?" "You'd need to appear before the assessors board, present documentation of your work, propose a realistic repayment timeline." She tore a form from her clipboard and handed it to him. "Fill this out. Submit it within 30 days. And kid, get a lawyer. You're going to need one." She walked back to her vehicle, then paused before getting in. "For what it's worth," she said, "I hope you make it. This valley could use more people who actually give a damn about the land." She drove away, leaving Marcus standing in the driveway holding the form. $14,000. He didn't have it, but he knew where to get it. That night, Marcus returned to the tunnel. He descended into the hidden chambers and stood among the barrels and bottles and crates of gold coins. He could sell 1 bottle of wine and clear the entire debt with money to spare. But he couldn't. Not yet. He was 15. If he showed up anywhere trying to sell rare wine or antique gold coins, questions would be asked. Investigations would be launched. He needed to wait until he was 18, until he had legal autonomy. 3 more years. But the county wanted payment now. Marcus sat in the darkness, thinking. Then he had an idea. He didn't need to sell the treasure itself. He needed to sell what the land could produce. He needed to prove the vineyard could be valuable again, not through what was buried beneath it, but through what could grow on top of it. Marcus spent the next 2 weeks researching viticulture. He studied the old agriculture books in the house, focusing on the sections about grape cultivation. He learned about soil pH, drainage, sun exposure, varietal selection. And he discovered something extraordinary. The dead vines covering his property weren't random plantings. They were Zinfandel, a varietal that had once made California famous, planted during the gold rush era by European immigrants. More importantly, these were old vines, pre-Prohibition stock, possibly over 100 years old. And old vines, if they could be revived, produced grapes of exceptional quality. Marcus examined the vines more closely. Most were completely dead, brittle black, wood that crumbled at the touch. But some, buried under years of neglect and dead growth, still had living root systems. He could see it in the patterns of soil moisture, in the slight green tinge visible when he scraped bark from thicker trunks. The vineyard wasn't entirely dead. It was dormant, waiting. Marcus made a decision that would define the next phase of his life. He was going to revive the vineyard, not with money he didn't have or expertise he lacked, but with time, labor, and absolute stubborn refusal to give up. He started with a single acre, the acre closest to the well, where water access was easiest. He spent weeks clearing dead growth, cutting away diseased wood, exposing the original root structures of the oldest vines. He hand-dug trenches for a drip irrigation system made from salvaged PVC pipe and recycled materials. He amended the soil with compost he'd been building for months from kitchen scraps and plant matter. He pruned the surviving vines according to principles he'd read about in the old manuals, cutting away everything except the strongest shoots. It was December when he finished the first acre. The vines looked terrible, bare, twisted, scarred. But they were alive. And in spring, they would either grow or die. Marcus could only wait. Winter in the valley was cold and wet. Marcus spent those months improving the house, making it genuinely livable. He patched the roof properly. He sealed gaps in the walls. He rigged a basic solar panel system using equipment he salvaged from an abandoned farm down the road. He also went into town for the first time in months. He needed supplies, and he needed to start establishing himself as a legitimate resident. The nearest town was Coalinga, population 3,500, 20 minutes away by foot. Marcus walked there on a Saturday morning, carrying vegetables from his garden to sell. He set up at the edge of the farmer's market, just a card table with a handwritten sign, "Fresh organic vegetables." The other vendors eyed him with curiosity and suspicion. a teenage boy, alone, selling produce. But his vegetables were good, clean, fresh, obviously well-grown. He sold out in 3 hours and made $68. He used the money to buy seeds, basic supplies, and a library card. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, looked at him over her glasses when he filled out the application form. "You're new in town," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." "Where do you live?" "Out on Old Vineyard Road." The Chen property. Her eyebrows rose. "Robert and Lynn's place?" "They were my parents." Her expression softened. "I heard about the accident." "I'm so sorry." She paused. "Are you out there alone?" Marcus met her eyes. "I'm managing." She studied him for a long moment, then stamped his library card. "Come by any time," she said. "We have a good agriculture section." Marcus became a regular at the library. He read everything he could find about viticulture, soil science, water management, organic farming. He took notes in careful handwriting, filling notebook after notebook. Mrs. Chen occasionally recommended books, never asking questions about his living situation. She understood, in the quiet way some people do, that he needed space and knowledge more than he needed intervention. Spring arrived in late February. Marcus stood in the revived acre and watched as tiny green buds appeared on the prune vines. They were growing. Not all of them. Maybe 1 in 5 survived. But the ones that did grew with vigor, pushing new shoots toward the sun. By April, the acre was covered in green growth. By May, Marcus saw the first small clusters of grapes forming. He photographed every stage, documenting the resurrection of vines everyone had declared dead. In June, he appeared before the county assessor's board. He wore his cleanest clothes, still worn and patched, but presentable. He brought his documentation, his photographs, his harvest records, his receipts, and he presented his case. "I'm Marcus Chen. I'm 16 years old. I own 60 acres on Old Vineyard Road through legal inheritance. For the past 14 months, I've been living on and actively improving this property. I've revived 1 acre of century-old Zinfandel vines. I've established vegetable crops. I've repaired infrastructure. And I'm prepared to continue this work for as long as it takes to make this land productive again." The board members, 3 county officials in business attire, looked skeptical. "Mr. Chen," one of them said, "you're a minor, living alone. The state has legitimate concerns about your welfare." "The state put me in a facility where I was going to be shipped off to a farm labor program," Marcus replied calmly. "I chose to labor on my own land instead, and I've proven I can survive and improve the property." "The back taxes remain an issue," another board member said. $14,000 is not a trivial sum. "I'm proposing a payment plan," Marcus said. "My first harvest will be this September. Based on conservative estimates of yield and market prices for organic heirloom grapes, I can generate enough revenue to begin payments within 6 months. Full repayment within 3 years." "That's optimistic," the third official said. "It's achievable," Marcus countered. "And I have something the county needs to consider. Those vines I revived are pre-Prohibition Zinfandel. They are potentially some of the oldest producing vines in California. That has significant agricultural and historical value." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs of the vines, documentation of their age, and letters from 2 university agriculture professors he'd contacted who'd confirmed the vine's significance. The board members examined the documents in silence. Finally, the lead official spoke. "Mr. Chen, this board is prepared to grant you a provisional 2-year extension on tax repayment, contingent on demonstrated agricultural income and continued property improvement. You'll submit quarterly progress reports. If you miss 2 consecutive reports or fail to make minimum payments, the property will be seized and auctioned." "I understand," Marcus said. And the official added, "We're requiring you to establish legal guardianship. You cannot continue living alone as a minor. Do you have any adult willing to serve as your court-appointed guardian?" Marcus's heart sank. He didn't. He had no family, no adults who knew him well enough to take legal responsibility. "I'll find someone," he said. "You have 60 days," the official said, "or this agreement is void." Marcus left the courthouse with 2 years to prove himself and 60 days to find an adult willing to trust him. He returned to the library the next day. Mrs. Chen was at her usual desk, cataloging new arrivals. Marcus approached slowly, unsure how to begin. "Mrs. Chen," he said quietly, "could I ask you something personal?" She looked up. "Of course. Do you know anyone who might be willing to serve as a legal guardian for a minor who's mostly self-sufficient and just needs someone to sign papers occasionally?" She set down the book she was holding. "Is this about you?" "Yes, ma'am." "The county is requiring it." "Yes." She studied him over her glasses. "Marcus, I've been watching you for months. You come in here 3 times a week. You read books most adults wouldn't touch. You ask intelligent questions. You're trying to accomplish something extraordinary." "I just want to keep my land," he said. "It's more than that," she replied. "You want to prove everyone wrong." He didn't deny it. Mrs. Chen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My husband died 6 years ago. We never had children. I've been alone in a house too big for one person ever since." Marcus waited. "I'm 67 years old," she continued. "Too old to raise a teenager in any traditional sense. But I'm not too old to provide legal oversight for a young man who clearly doesn't need parenting so much as he needs institutional support." She looked at him directly. "If you're willing to have an elderly librarian as your official guardian, someone who will give you space to do what you're doing, but also make sure you don't completely neglect education and health, I'll sign the papers." Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. "Why would you do that?" he asked. "Because I knew your parents," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "Robert and Lynn came to this library before you were born. They talked about their dreams for that land. And I watched those dreams die when they did. If their son wants to resurrect them, the least I can do is make sure the system doesn't crush him first." Marcus became the legal ward of Eleanor Chen in August. It was a strange arrangement, acknowledged by both of them as primarily bureaucratic. Marcus continued living on the property. Mrs. Chen visited once a week, bringing books, checking on his welfare, and occasionally insisting he come to town for a proper meal and a shower. "I'm not your mother," she told him. "I'm your institutional advocate. But that doesn't mean I don't care whether you're eating enough or sleeping on a mattress instead of the floor." She also insisted he continue formal education. Marcus enrolled in online high school courses, studying at night by firelight and solar-powered laptop. He completed assignments between farm work, writing essays about agricultural economics and literature analysis in notebooks that smelled like soil and compost. September arrived. The first harvest. Marcus walked through his revived acre and examined the grape clusters hanging heavy on the vines. They were beautiful. Small, intensely dark, thick-skinned. Exactly what Zinfandel should be. He picked them by hand, carefully cutting each cluster and placing them in baskets. The total yield was modest, about 2 tons of grapes, but the quality was exceptional. Marcus contacted small wineries in the region offering samples. 3 responded. 1 winemaker. A woman named Rosa Delgado, who ran a boutique operation in Paso Robles, drove out personally to see the vines. She walked through the acre in silence, examining leaves, testing soil, tasting grapes. Finally, she turned to Marcus. "These are extraordinary," she said. "Old vine Zinfandel from original rootstock. Do you understand what you have here?" "Valuable vines," Marcus replied. "More than that. If these vines are truly pre-Prohibition, and if the terroir is what I think it is, you're growing grapes that could produce wine worth $300 a bottle. Maybe more." Marcus kept his expression neutral. "I'm selling the grapes, not making wine." "Smart," Rosa said. "You don't have the equipment or licenses, but I do, and I'm willing to pay top market rate for your entire harvest. $4,000 per ton. $8,000 for 2 tons. More than enough to start paying the county. More than enough to prove his land had value." "Deal," Marcus said. They shook hands in the vineyard. That night, Marcus sat on the porch of the repaired house and allowed himself to feel something he'd been suppressing for over a year. Hope. Real, concrete, justified hope. The land was producing. He was making it work. And beneath it all, still secret and protected, lay the treasure that would ensure he never lost this place. But he wasn't ready to reveal that yet. He had time. He had patience. And most importantly, he had proof that everyone who'd abandoned this land had been wrong. By 17, Marcus had expanded production to 5 acres. The vineyard was genuinely thriving now, the old vines producing consistent yields of exceptional quality grapes. Rosa Delgado had become his primary buyer, and her winery's reputation had grown alongside the quality of Marcus's fruit. She'd started labeling bottles with the vineyard name, Chen Estate, Old Vines Infidel. Wine critics noticed. Articles appeared in regional publications about the mysterious teenager who'd resurrected a dead vineyard through sheer determination and talent. Marcus avoided interviews, maintaining privacy, focusing on work. But the attention had consequences, mostly good ones. Other wineries approached him. Prices for his grapes increased. He was making real money now, enough to pay the county in full and invest in proper equipment. He bought a small tractor, professional irrigation systems, quality tools. The property transformed from a survival operation into a functioning farm. Mrs. Chen watched his progress with quiet pride. "You've done something remarkable," she told him during one of their weekly dinners. "You've taken tragedy and turned it into triumph." "I just did what needed doing," Marcus replied. "Most people can't do that," she said. "Most people give up when the world tells them something is worthless." Marcus thought about the treasure beneath the vineyard. He still hadn't told anyone. Not Mrs. Chen, not Rosa, not the professors who'd authenticated his vines. The secret stayed buried, protected, waiting. He was 18 now, legally an adult. He could reveal what he'd found and claim it without the state intervening. But he wasn't sure he wanted to. The vineyard gave him purpose. The work gave him identity. The treasure felt almost irrelevant compared to what he'd built with his own hands. Still, it nagged at him. What should he do with it? The question answered itself during his first semester of college. Marcus had enrolled part-time at the local community college, studying viticulture and business. During an agricultural economics class, the professor discussed land conservation and heritage preservation. "California is losing its agricultural history," the professor explained. "Old vineyards are being torn up for housing developments. Historic farms are disappearing. We're erasing our connection to the land." An idea began forming in Marcus's mind. That evening, he went down into the tunnel for the first time in over a year. The chambers were exactly as he'd left them. Barrels, bottles, gold coins, a fortune no one knew existed. Marcus sat among the crates and made a decision. He would reveal the treasure, but not for personal wealth. He would use it to establish something permanent, a foundation dedicated to preserving agricultural heritage, to helping young farmers access land, to protecting historic vineyards from development. The treasure his father had hinted at would become a legacy far greater than money. It would become hope for people like him, people who'd been told their dreams were worthless. Marcus spent the next 6 months planning carefully. He contacted lawyers, historians, agricultural preservation organizations. He documented everything about the tunnel, its construction, the artifacts, the probable history. He hired an appraiser to evaluate the wine collection. The estimate came back staggering. $17 million for the bottles alone. The gold added another $4 million. $21 million buried beneath land everyone had rejected. Marcus didn't keep it. He established the Chen Agricultural Heritage Foundation, endowing it with the entire treasure. The foundation's mission: to provide land grants and mentorship to young farmers from disadvantaged backgrounds, to preserve historic vineyards across California, to prove that land has value beyond market price. The announcement made national news. Orphan teenager discovers multi-million-dollar treasure, gives it all away. Journalists descended on the property, asking how it felt to give up such wealth. Marcus stood among his thriving vines and answered honestly, "This land taught me that value isn't what others see. It's what you're willing to work for. I don't need the treasure. I have something better. I have purpose and the ability to help others find theirs. The foundation's first recipient was a 19-year-old former foster kid named David, who'd been rejected by traditional farm loan programs. Marcus met him personally, walking him through the Chen estate vineyard. 5 years ago, I was sleeping in a house with a collapsed roof, eating weeds, wondering if I'd survive, Marcus told him. Today, I'm standing in a vineyard worth millions, not because of treasure I found, but because of work I did. He handed David the deed to 20 acres the foundation had purchased. Now it's your turn, Marcus said. Show the world what worthless land can become. By 25, Marcus had expanded the Chen estate to 40 producing acres. The remaining 20 acres he'd converted into an educational farm, where young farmers learned sustainable viticulture. Mrs. Chen, now 74, served on the foundation board. Rosa Delgado had become his business partner, and their wines had won international recognition. But Marcus's proudest achievement wasn't the awards or the wealth he'd generated through legitimate agriculture. It was the letter he received from the state foster care system. Dear Mr. Chen, we wanted to inform you that David Martinez, recipient of your foundation's first land grant, has successfully completed his third harvest and will be self-sustaining by next year. He has also begun mentoring 2 other former foster youth in agricultural careers. Your program is changing lives. Marcus kept that letter on his desk. Next to it, he kept the note his father had written. The land always gives what you plant, but sometimes the greatest treasure is already buried. He finally understood what his father had meant. The treasure wasn't the gold or the wine. It was the belief that worthless things could become valuable if someone cared enough to dig deep and work hard. His father had planted that belief in him, and now Marcus was planting it in others. The vineyard everyone rejected had become a symbol of hope. The orphan no one wanted had become a voice for the forgotten. And the land that seemed dead had proven, season after season, that patience and care could resurrect even the most broken things. Marcus stood in his vineyard on the 10th anniversary of the day he'd first arrived, alone and desperate, thinking he had nothing. Now he stood surrounded by thriving vines, by young farmers learning their craft, by a community he'd helped build. The fortune beneath his feet had purchased possibility for hundreds of people. But the real wealth was simpler than that. It was waking up every morning on land that was his, working soil that responded to his care, watching things grow that everyone said couldn't, and knowing with absolute certainty that his parents' faith in this place had been justified. The land always gives what you plant. Marcus had planted hope, and it had grown beyond anything he'd imagined possible.